evening, saints. It is so good to be here tonight. I'm still getting over the music, first of all. We in the Episcopal Church, we can get down a little bit, but not like y'all. So I just need to say another amen and thank you for that beautiful rendition of Great is Thy Faithfulness. Oh, it's so good to be here. So good because I've been waiting a long time to be with you all. I want to thank my colleague, Rick Spleth. We have a special thing going here in Indiana and at the Interchurch Center, and I think a lot of it is because of Rick's leadership. He was one of the first to welcome me here. And in the short year and a half or so that I've been here, I've come to really experience Rick as a good colleague and friend and a bit of a mentor in this work. Leading judicatories is a different kind of ministry, and there's a learning curve with that, and it helps to have folks who know a little bit about it along the way who are close. So I mean that, Rick. Thank you for all you do. It's been wonderful so far, and I look forward to the journey to come. I want to bring you greetings on behalf of the Episcopal Diocese of Indianapolis, which, despite its name, is the Episcopal Church in central and southern Indiana. And so we cover the territory from about Lafayette to the north, all the way down to Kentucky and sort of river to river, border to border. And so we have 48 congregations, about 10,000 of us. And on their behalf, I want to bring you those greetings and to say how delighted we are that we are in a place where the kind of partnerships we have here exist. To echo again about what happens in Indiana, it really is different in other places. I had my first job in the Interchurch Center in Manhattan out of college working for a nonprofit, and I believe this is the only other interchurch center in the country. And so that says something about the DNA of relationship here. I think we have more we can do, though, working together. And so I would add that as I have come to value my relationships with Rick and Chad and others who meet monthly, I would hope that we would continue to drill down and find ways for our people, our congregations, our pastors, ministers, priests to continue to find ways to collaborate and work together. So may this be the continuing work that we would be called to. So, can we talk? Sure. Can we talk? I think actually part of the question is, will we talk? So we can talk. Will we talk? And will we talk with one another in ways that really matter? This is one of the most important topics, this Can We Talk business is one of the most important topics we can address in these days. How we speak and be with one another, especially regarding difficult topics, is critical right now. Our inability to talk with one another and be real in our relationships, our inability to do that is jeopardizing our relationships, our congregations, and our democracy. I don't have to remind you of what's at stake. You hear the news every day. You know what's going on. Today especially, it reveals the brokenness in our society. And for those of us who share a commitment and a hope for a new community, the beloved community, we must not let the difficulties of the present age diminish our commitment to justice and reconciliation at the heart of God's mission for this church and this world. We must not get discouraged and forget who we are and how we are to be with one another. So a little bit about me. You've got that bio, but I want to tell you about what brings me to some of this work. I am from New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn originally Brooklyn, yay! Whoop, whoop, there you go. Grew up in Brooklyn till I was 10, and then we moved, and I was in the middle of my 5th grade year to Staten Island. Anybody know Staten Island? Yeah. So it was a different thing. I moved from a neighborhood that was quite diverse, where people mixed it up. There were blacks, whites, and Puerto Ricans kind of on top of each other, and Orthodox Jews all around, and that was just the way the world is. And I'll even, admit that I was a child, so I viewed that with a little bit of some naivete, perhaps, about how the world really worked. But there was no mistaking what it meant to be formed, assuming that everybody could be together. When we moved to Staten Island to be closer to other family members, I had a rude awakening and discovered how divided the world really could be, and how not only were people divided, but they were actually encouraged to stay apart, to actually dare to cross the race line, which I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do, was a problem. The place where I first came to know what racism really, really felt like, as it was, between the race riots that would happen, or kids doing just horrible things, or adults doing horrible things to children. It was a really hard place. And so for a long time, I thought, this is not my work, reconciliation, race. But it's funny how God works. Sometimes God will just say, you know what? We're just going to bring you right back to the very thing that you thought you needed to run away from. Anybody know what I mean? So, here we are, reconciliation. I've been searching, I think, ever since that childhood for a place to live that is what I think is what God desires for the world, which is where we all exist together in an integrated way. I served a church in Syracuse, New York, and folks say, you were crazy to leave Berkeley, California for Syracuse. Why would you ever do that? Because Berkeley and San Francisco are lovely places. But I felt called to go to Syracuse because this was one of the few churches, still is, one of the few churches in the Episcopal Church that's truly integrated. And we spent 1 year, 2007, talking about race nonstop. It's funny, it's an interesting congregation because they love to talk about race, because they said if we don't talk about it, we will not stay diverse. We'll forget that we believe that this is an asset. And we want the world to know that this is how we believe the world should be. So it was a fascinating community. More recently, before coming to Indianapolis to serve as bishop, I lived in Skokie, Illinois. Yeah, Skokie. Now, I have to tell you, what I loved about Skokie was that it felt like Brooklyn to me circa 1975. Because I would look out my kitchen window on a Saturday morning, and I would see the Jews walking to their temple. And then, with the covering. And then I would see the Muslims walking to prayer. And then I would see just all kinds of European folks walking around. We were all mixed up together, house by house. It wasn't always like that. There was a time when there were racial covenants and all kinds of things keeping people from being able to buy property there. But they, in the wake of some difficult histories in that community, talk about race as a community all of the time. In fact, they have an ongoing discussion series every year. And so I thought there's something about this talking about the things that seem like they're too hot to touch. It makes the communities different because it brings a kind of intentionality to it. So can we talk? The issue is, will we? I serve a denomination, the Episcopal Church, that wants to do this work deeply. We are committed to what we call building the beloved community, and at the heart of it is teaching people how to have a conversation. And so I believe there's something about this talking business that's not just about hot air. Tonight, I want to share with you some things that I've learned from a corporate model teaching of organizational health called Fierce Conversations. Anybody hear of that before? Fierce Conversations. Maybe you've read the book by Susan Scott, or you've taken a workshop. I want to just tell you, this is not a workshop tonight, but what I think, though, Susan Scott in her brilliance, and you can pick up the book from just about anywhere, get it on a Kindle, she basically kind of puts in a way that we can grasp and hold on to what I think is something that might actually help change us for the better, because she is all about trying to get real. In a world that wants to run away from the difficult stuff, in a time in which it's easy to stay isolated and comfortable with the people who are just like us, whoever us is, she's saying we need to get real. Fierce Conversations first came to me when I was serving in the Diocese of Chicago, and they took it as a way to help congregations become more vital. So I'll add that to the list. It's not just about how to change the world or how to make your relationships better, but actually we believe the church, which has challenges about talking about things, could actually learn how to get real, particularly because we're, as Christians and followers of Jesus, we talk about being real and authentic all the time. And yet, it's so easy even for us not to do it. So what we're going to do, and we'll walk through it, we're going to have some time to learn about some of these concepts. You're going to have a little bit of table conversations along the way, just to ask and ponder a couple of things. And then we'll sort of see how we are at the end of the time, whether we might have some Q&A time. Okay, does that sound like a good way to go? All right, so let me just call out a couple of things I noticed on your tables. One, there is a beach ball. You may be wondering why there are beach balls on your tables. Anybody wonder about that? Because the theme is, can we talk, not let's have a beach ball party. But the beach ball is, it's a real tangible way that Fierce likes to illustrate what it calls its beach ball conversation. It's one of the things that you would learn if you're going to do their 2-day workshop. And one day, I might lead a 2-day workshop or training some other facilitators locally, and so you'll learn how to do that. But the whole point is that on a beach ball, you look at it, even at your table, you're looking at one stripe, right? You might even be able to see a little bit of a stripe on the left or to the right, but you may have the stripe on the other side completely invisible to you. You can't see it. So when you're having a beach ball conversation, which is a kind of fierce conversation, you are inviting the perspectives of those who are different from you. And that's the best way to get wisdom. And even having the stripe that you can't see, the person you wouldn't expect, the one who differs in opinion from you, that there's value in that. So thank you, Diane, for putting the beach balls as a reminder about how to have everyone at the table for a fierce conversation. The other thing I would want to call out to you is that you have these holy manners, those yellow table tents on your tables. I think those are beautiful ways of kind of affirming some of the principles that we're going to learn about today. So you've got lots of reminders after tonight as you go through your assembly about how to keep some of these principles in front of you. So let's see. I'm going to learn how to use this clicker here. There we go. I have 2 quotes to get us going. We're going to use a little scripture to start us off. So Ephesians 4:15-16. This is the version from the Message translation. No prolonged infancies among us, please. We'll not tolerate babes in the woods, small children who are an easy mark for imposters. God wants us to grow up, to know the whole truth and tell it in love, like Christ in everything. We take our lead from Christ, who is the source of everything we do. He keeps us in step with each other. His very breath and blood flow through us, nourishing us, so that we will grow up healthy in God, robust in love. That's the Message translation. The more well-known verse is this: but speaking the truth in love, we must grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ. And I put those in front of us to remind us that this talking business is not just something we would do for the sake of being good people, but this is actually faith work. It's holy work. It's about growing into the mind and stature of Christ work. I have another quote. This one's not, it's a little edgier. This is from Jim Palmer. It's kind of interesting with church. I've only do this conversation in church, and he is, I think, a former church person who might be called an atheist. And so, but he's compelling to me. And so he says, I sometimes wonder if people are willing and capable of having the kinds of real, authentic, substantial, vigorous, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations that are necessary if we really want to divest ourselves from the BS in our heads and get down to what is real. So there it is. You can take your version, but the reality is, one way or the other, we need to start telling the truth to one another and being real Being real. As people of faith and compassionate purpose, we must learn to speak the truth in love. We must learn to have real, authentic, substantial, vigorous, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. We need to be willing and we need to be capable. And so I hope when you're done with your assembly, you will feel like you have moved a few notches over in the capable department. So I'm going to get you talking. I want to ask you to find someone, maybe pair up by twos at your tables, and take a couple of minutes. You may know the person you're talking to, but if you don't, introduce yourself. And I want you to describe a recent conversation that you had that left you feeling energized and satisfied. So take a minute and think about a conversation that you had recently that just left you feeling like, yeah, I'm in this conversation. It feels great. I've got energy. And just spend a couple of minutes talking to each other about what that conversation was and what it felt like. Go. All right, I'm going to call you back. Nice job, everybody. I'm going to call you back to continue. So, a lot of energy in this room about that. That's good. I've got another prompt for you, so come back. I'm going to have you talk again. So, how was that? Good energy? Felt good? Yeah. It's nice when you can remember a conversation that makes you feel good. Now I want you to describe a conversation that left you feeling frustrated. Describe a conversation that left you feeling frustrated, sad, just it did not go well. Talk about it, and I'll call you back. You've got a couple of minutes. So I would love if we had the time for you to think about what the difference was. It's a lot of energy still, talking about a frustrated conversation, but I bet you have some preferences about the kind of conversations you'd rather have, right? I have one last question, but I'm not going to ask you to talk about this. I want you to ponder this. You might write it down. But I want you to think about what is the conversation that you wish you would have? What is the conversation you need to have, but you're putting off? What is the conversation that still has your name on it? Just think about that. Right, Ron, if it comes to mind, write it down. You've got some time tonight to think about it, but I do want you to have a sense of what that is before we finish this evening. So what is the conversation you most need to have that you're avoiding like the plague? I'm going to continue. So Susan Scott says that while no single conversation is guaranteed to change the trajectory of a career, a church, we say, a relationship, or a life, any single conversation can. Can you imagine? While no single conversation is guaranteed to change the trajectory of a church or a career or a relationship or a life, any single conversation can. All that possibility. I mean, just think about it. Can you think of a conversation that you had that changed your mind or changed your life? I remember when the Reverend Caroline Stacy came up to me when I was at a dinner in 1990, and she asked me to talk to her about the priesthood. She said, I think you might want to discern that. Now, I already had a plan for my life because I was going to go off and do this other thing. I was off to grad school and going to continue on my path of architecture. But that question, that conversation, shifted everything. And here I am. Any single conversation can make a difference. And we all have that. You can probably think of at least one conversation that changed everything, or maybe just shifted your thinking in a significant way. I also remember the conversation with a priest colleague I had in 2004. This was a year after the Episcopal Church had wrestled quite publicly after Gene Robinson was consecrated bishop, first openly gay bishop in our church. And I remember going to a clergy gathering for the first time returning to Syracuse, and a young woman who I helped raise up for ministry had just come back from seminary to serve. And she had gone to Cornell, and we had sent her off to seminary. And so she was, one of part of my alma mater community. And she had gotten married in seminary to someone much more conservative. And she shifted greatly. And so after Jean Robinson's consecration, I remember her saying to me, "I want your church to die. We can talk about football." And no offense to Colts fans, but I don't know anything about football. And so I thought, well, I don't, And she said, "We can't talk about church because I don't want your church to live." And that was the last conversation we ever had. So any conversation can change things. It can either create the opportunities for relationship or it can tear it apart. Conversations, as you know well, each one of us are powerful. And everyone in their own way is wrestling with a conversation we may not want to have because we know that maybe the relationship is at stake. Either there isn't one yet, or the one we have is tenuous, and the conversation might just be the thing that tears it apart. Fierce conversations, though, are different. A fierce conversation, let's see, I went too fast? No. Fierce conversation has 4 objectives and 3 ideas and 7 principles, and we're going to talk about that. I'm going to see if I can go forward to get a definition. There we go. Our definition is a conversation in which you come out from behind yourself into the conversation and make it real. So all that stuff about getting real, a fierce conversation, there are a lot of ways to have conversations, but a fierce conversation is about being authentic and real. I like to think that Jesus knew fierce conversations before it had a trademark and fancy, logos and books. Like, this is what Jesus did, showing up fully, authentically himself every time and expecting that after he encountered someone that things would be different. So the first things that a fierce conversation is about, it's about interrogating reality. How afraid are we sometimes to do that? Isn't it easier to pretend not to know? A fierce conversation is about saying that I have a sense of reality and the other has a sense of reality, and we need to interrogate it together and get curious. To actually get curious about that which we don't fully know, and to listen ourselves into finding out about something. The second objective of a fierce conversation is to provoke learning. We love to learn. Sometimes it's harder to learn things when it might challenge our own opinions or perceptions. But a fierce conversation provokes learning, both the person bringing the conversation and the other. Everyone in the conversation should learn something. It's assuming that any of us, don't have all the answers, right? I mean, this is what it means to be a created person and not God, that we can actually be learning about what reality looks like from the position of the other. The third thing that a fierce conversation does is that it tackles tough challenges. Now, church, I think this is one of our hardest things. And maybe it's hard just because we're human, but it's really easy to procrastinate about those things that we don't want to do but should. And fierce would say, don't put it off. Today's the day. This is the moment. Don't wait to have the conversations that you need to have, because any conversation can shift things. So start. Don't delay. Delaying the challenge before you uses up energy that you don't have to waste. And you know how it is when that thing that you know you need to talk about but can't, how much headspace that takes up? That's a lot of headspace and energy that we can be doing other things with. So fear says, tackle the challenge. And then the fourth objective, this is the thing that is the topper for us. A conversation is not fierce unless it enriches relationships. If you go into a conversation expecting to come out without a relationship, or if you go into a conversation not caring about the relationship, it's not fierce, and it won't get us where we might want to go. So imagine if you are going to talk about something really difficult, and you know it, and the other person knows it. If you go in with the intention of being in deeper relationship on the other side of it, would that change it? 2 years ago, I was on sabbatical time, and I spent about a month in the Bahamas, where my husband is from. And I love my relatives, my in-laws. There are two sets. There are the Anglican set, and they live in the Abacos on one island. And then there is the more evangelical set who live on Green Turtle Key, which is my favorite place in the world. And I love them. But this was July 2016. And I spent 3.5 weeks debating about the now President of the United States. All day, every day. I mean, I read a lot. I took walks on the beach. We had cookouts. But let me just tell you, we could not be on more different sides of the political spectrum. And they don't live here. They're in the Bahamas, right? But they care deeply because what happens in the United States matters, right? And they're faithful, and they have their ideas about things, and I had my ideas about things, and I was never going to change their mind about things. But I wanted to know why they believed the things they believed that was different from me, and I love them, truly. I can't wait to see them again. But it was hard. It was hard because, it's a lot different kind of energy when you know that you're not going to come to a place where you're going to change your mind. And sometimes it's okay. Our relationship is intact. And we'd rather have the relationship than be apart and not in relationship, agreeing about all the things. So it has to be about enriching the relationship. So there are these different transformational ideas, 3 of them that Fierce has, and they say these are the things that really help kind of cement it in our minds. The first one is that our careers and our churches, our relationships, and our very lives succeed or fail gradually, then suddenly, one conversation at a time. So, this is, again, that power. There's a power in just one conversation. But truly, while we may be surprised at where we find ourselves in life or where our country is, Me Too, climate change, political division, race, relationships, all of it, all the things you're going to talk about, the things that consume our time, these things did not just happen. Gradually, then suddenly, here we are. Our careers, our relationships, our congregations, the state of the world are always moving in one direction or another. Conversations and staying in touch is the way that we track the trends of how things are going. And we course correct if necessary so that, as much as we can help it, things don't sneak up on us. Every conversation is moving us either closer to where we want to go or further away. So the problem isn't usually the conversations that we're having that are hard or failed, or what we like to say is raggedy, because we mess up and we don't do it right and we step on toes and we have hurt feelings. Those are great conversations. They're hard, but those are really good. The problem is when we don't have the conversation at all. It is the missing conversation that is the problem. Because if we don't have the conversation, we fill in the gaps with our own stuff and we just begin to make assumptions. So the problem isn't messing up and having the conversation, it's avoiding it. We like to call it the elephant in the room, right? How often do you ever say that in the course of life, right? You know there's an elephant. In fierce language, they talk and tell the story about Papua New Guinea, which has something called a mosquito. It's basically the elephant in the room. And what they say is that a mosquito is that which everyone knows, but about which no one speaks. That which everyone knows, but about which no one speaks. And so the legend is that once a year or so, they have a mosquito amnesty day, where they just say, you know what, everybody, just say it, get it out there, and then we can actually do something. Can you imagine? What would happen if we did that in the church? I'm going to invite y'all to try it, because I'm in a different denomination, so y'all just go for it. No, but really, we need to name those things. We need to name it. Our mosquitoes are killing us, and we know it. We know it. We just kind of go along and pretend it's not happening. But when we have the conversations we need to have and keep coming back to them even when they're difficult, we have at least a chance. We have at least a chance to get where we want to go, gradually, and then suddenly. The second transformational idea, did I go back? These, I have to tell you about this. These were going to gently kind of fall down, and I had all these little graphic things because I was playing with PowerPoint like I've never done it before. So I want to keep the slide here and put the clicker down. The second one is the conversation is the relationship. Susan Scott tells a story about poet David White. Maybe you know his poetry. He's from the Pacific Northwest. And David White tells a story of a couple that's having a conversation every weekend about their relationship. And typically in this kind of outdated, stereotypical setup, the man is upset because his wife wants to talk about the relationship every single weekend. And it gradually occurs to him that all of this talk he's having about the relationship isn't just talk. The conversation actually is the relationship. And so there's something to that. The conversation is the relationship. If we think about the things we don't talk about in our relationships, we begin to see there's a correlation. If we have this list of things that we don't want to talk about because it's going to mess up another weekend or people are going to start feeling bad, and we have this long list of things that are all the maquitas and just we're just going to keep it here at the shallow level and not go deep ever, that's going to be how our relationships are. You begin to squeeze out the possibilities for the relationship when you squeeze out the things you can't talk about. It doesn't help. And so if we lower the standards about what we want to talk about or what we can talk about, and we kind of lower our degrees of authenticity, gradually then suddenly, people wake up and they wonder why their relationships are the way they are. And if they're not in a good state, you might ask yourself, well, what do we talk about? We need, in this day particularly, to summon our relational courage. We have to find a way to have the courage, build up the emotional capital, even with those with whom we disagree, and keep the conversation going. It's hard, it's holy, and it's Jesus-like. We have to keep trying to talk about the things that matter. And the third one, I got to put that down. All conversations are with myself, and sometimes they involve other people. All conversations are with myself, and sometimes they involve other people. So, maybe if you're the exception who doesn't always have a dialogue going on in their head, right? We all have stuff. We have bias, we have assumptions about the world, about people. We make all kinds of sort of pictures in our heads, our filter that helps or prevents us from seeing the other or hearing them truly. And if we forget we have those, we get into trouble. We make assumptions. We begin to think that we know what the other person's going to say. And maybe you've done that. Someone's talking and you're like, I know what they're going to say. I'm going to fill it in right here. I'm not even hearing what they're saying because I'm filling in their dialogue with what I'm saying in my head. Anybody ever do that? You know, we can be honest here. We do that, and so it's human. And what fear says is, understand you do it, check it, and keep listening. All those beliefs that get in the way from really hearing the other, because you know how their conversation might go, doesn't help us get to having a real conversation. We have to get curious about the other. So here's a good time for me to just say that all of this stuff about fear, you might think, well, this is really good. What happens if the other person hasn't been in this room and doesn't know a thing about fierce conversations? How is this really going to work, right? But here's the surprise. It doesn't matter. It's not about them. It's about you. It's about how you enter the conversation. It's about what the assumptions you have for what the other person might say, and to believe that actually you have enough power in your being different in the conversation to change how it might go. It's an amazing thing. If you say, I can't talk about gun violence, or I can't talk about Black Lives Matter with this other person because I know how it's going to go, so we're just not going to talk about it, you are giving away your power. You're giving away your power to the very person you're struggling with. So don't do that. Claim your space. Bring up the conversation. It's time that we abandon our concerns about what other people may or may not be able to handle and try just showing up fully, authentically, on your own and see what happens. We have to try, one conversation at a time. So quickly, 7 principles. These are some things that you might remember, and I kind of like, again, your holy manners. They kind of get to this work too. Just to summarize some of what this is about, we want to be able to master the courage to interrogate reality. It takes courage. It takes courage that we have to summon up to actually be curious about the other and what they think. And so if we wonder, well, you know what, I have this conversation I know I need to have, and I'm nervous about it, it's going to be hard. Yes, it is. It just may be. Summon up the courage anyway to get curious about what reality looks like from the other. The second one is come out from behind yourself into the conversation and make it real. Come out from behind, I've got this, I love the glass, the sort of lucite, you can see through it. I'm not really hiding, but I'm kind of hiding. Fierce is saying, come out from behind the thing. Come out from behind the mask. Whatever we put on to sort of feel like we can go out in the world, take off the mask. Be real. And bring that reality of who you are authentically into the conversation. The third one is be here, present, prepared to be nowhere else. I don't know about you, but if you've ever been on the phone, and I know a lot of people don't use the phone as much anymore, but I like the telephone. But if I'm on the phone with someone, and they're on the phone, and they're looking at their computer, I know. Don't you know when someone's multitasking? You can tell when someone's not giving you their full attention. And I've done it, so, I've not that I'm blameless here. And so there is something about the gift of giving someone your full attention. Imagine that alone. So when you're having a fierce conversation, something that's really important, you want to be there undistracted as much as possible. Put the cell phone in a basket somewhere far away so you're not even tempted. But show up. There is a quote that I love that says, there's the gift of attention is so valuable that we mistake it for other things because we don't get it enough. So show up present. It's a very Christ-like thing, right? Tackle your toughest challenge today. We talked about that. So I want you, if you haven't thought about that conversation you need to have, come up with that because it's going to come back to you in a second. But don't delay. We as a church can't afford, we as a society cannot afford to not talk about the things that really matter. And we keep putting it off. We sort of, kick the can down the road, all of that. Let's just try a little bit at a time, stepping into the space that's hard and having the conversation. Obey your instincts. Now, here's one that's really tricky. And if you were taking a Fierce Conversations workshop, we'd have a lot of time to talk about it because a lot of the world tells us to totally disregard our gut instincts. There's a lot of that. But Fierce would say, obey your instincts. There's a lot of data that we get from all sources as we're trying to navigate the world, and sometimes we too easily suppress and ignore the data generating from our own selves. Your gut instinct actually is a helpful source of information. So if you're stepping into a conversation that's hard and it's feeling like it's going to get really difficult, instead of going sort of full bore into it, read the other person. Maybe step back for a moment. Check in with how it's going. We don't always have perfect, steady, linear conversations. I mean, hardly ever, right? And so if you know you have to say something or want to say something, obey your instincts about that. Take responsibility for your emotional wake. So this is one that maybe you'll get some time to practice tomorrow in your small groups. But what this principle is about is that when we speak with one another, particularly about things of consequence, that we could actually end up leaving like a wake behind us of emotions and not even realize it. And so Fierce would say, you want to think about you're leaving a conversation, whether you are leaving a person with an aftertaste, an afterglow, or an aftermath. Which one do you want? You want to leave behind the afterglow, right? Be responsible for your emotional wake. So that means that when you get into a conversation and it gets sticky, because you're generating heat in a fierce conversation, you don't want to be ferocious. You want to be fierce, which is about keeping the relationship going. So if it gets kind of raggedy and messy, guess what? We can say, you know what? I'm sorry. I just said something really, I can see you're upset. I just messed that up. That's not how I meant to say it. Can we just take a step back and let me try that again? Can you imagine if someone said that to you when the conversation got hot instead of just walking away? What is there to lose by saying I'm sorry? We believe in redemption. We believe in turning back and trying again over and over again, right? This is a thing for us in the Christian community. So in a conversation, you can do that. I'm sorry. Can I try again? Let's take a minute. Take responsibility for your emotional wake. And then the last one, let silence do the heavy lifting. Now, we live in a world where silence can be hard to come by. We'll get in a car and drive to a monastery or a convent or the woods just to get some silence, and maybe we don't even get it there. But in a conversation, this is the place where, especially if we're talking about something difficult, instead of rushing in to fill the space with talk that doesn't mean a lot, what would it be if you were to say something and gave the person on the other side time to respond? And not only just not talking over them, but if they were responding and stopped and were mid-sentence and didn't know what to say, instead of rescuing them by saying something else, what would happen if you just sat there silently, giving them the space to figure out their thoughts? We all are different people. We come at things differently. We process fast, slow. In the heat of a conversation, particularly when the stakes are high, silence is your best friend. Because it's in silence that you can really listen. And maybe even I know when it's happening to me, I need that silence just to make sure of what I heard. And to think thoughtfully, and then to see if maybe in the space when no one is speaking, maybe something else can happen there. Not to walk away, but to let the silence be, especially when we feel like, it's just easy to kind of run through it and save it. Memorable conversations need breathing space. Some of these things, we know this. This is in prayer, right? God comes to us, my soul in silence waits. We know about this from the deepest parts of our tradition. It's just about asking us to bring this to the conversations that matter. So as we close, I'm going to ask you to have one last conversation. I want you to practice this part of living fierce. Because the biggest thing about fierce conversations is that none of this matters, really, unless you do something about it. Every time there's a fierce conversation method that's taught in a workshop, there's always an accountability piece. So that's what you're going to do tonight. I would like you to turn back to the person or someone else at your table, and you do not have to reveal that conversation that you know you need to have that you haven't had yet. But I want you to work it out in the next 2 minutes, your commitment to following up with that other person about how they're doing on having that conversation. If you don't have the contact information, get the cell phone number, get the email address. What is your covenant to check in on how's it going? Did you have that conversation? How can I pray for you and support you in doing that? Go. Not kidding. All right. I hope you all have figured some of that out. Thank you for that. And I do hope you will follow up on each other, because I'll tell you something you probably also already know. You know, the kingdom is not going to come by any one person doing anything, right? Not one of us. Jesus is showing us glimpses of the kingdom all the time. And we need each other. We need each other. I love that we belong to each other. We do indeed. And we need each other in this work to grow into the reconciling people that God calls us to be. And so because Rick's office is directly downstairs from mine, I'm going to check in a year and see how y'all are doing with all of this. But I do hope, so that's the great thing about community, I can come back. But I do hope that you'll practice some of these things. We like to call it real play, because life is too precious. The world is too in need of love. The times are such that we need to do everything we can to help give the Holy Spirit an assist, to bring grace and love and peace into this world. And I believe we can do it one conversation at a time. Thank you so much. It's been a delight to be with you.